Hi, I'm Milena, booktuber, bookstore owner, eclectic lover, and this will be my last episode in the Women's Rise Diaries. As of this point, I have still 2 books to go to have finished at least both the shortlists. I am in the middle of my last non-fiction book and I'm yet to start my last fiction book. It is a few days before the winner is announced. It's Monday, and on Wednesday or Thursday, I need to double check. I have quite a lot of reading to do, but I also have some reviews for you. Fundamentally, it's a satirical contemporary literary fiction novel about Nadia, who's in her 30s, and after a breakup she takes a job for the UN and she starts working in Iraq with ISIS brides, and she has no experience whatsoever of working in the field. She is a professor, a very young professor, who wrote a piece about how to rehabilitate ISIS brides, and based on that she was hired. Very soon it starts to show that she is very incompetent because she doesn't have that practical experience and everything is based on theory, and she notices very soon that she doesn't know how to lead a team. She doesn't know how to actually work her theories in practice, and it gets embarrassing for her. She's also quite an unlikable character. You have to be on board with that to be able to enjoy this novel. Therefore it was a bit of a complicated read for me. The first half in of this book, I was just not feeling it. The tone felt all wrong, and once I kind of understood that everything was satire in this book, I started to get along with it more. While Nadia is introduced as being a Muslim or previous Muslim herself, she says multiple times that one of those women could have been her because she works with women who traveled from abroad, mostly Western countries, to Iraq to join ISIS and to become an ISIS bride. And she says, I have met men who could have radicalized me, but I was lucky. Even though that is like present in the book and that is what our main character is, it still feels like a commentary on Western well-doers trying to, the UN in general as well, trying to do good by implementing their own views where they are either not wanted or they don't work. Nadia is so incompetent that she lets the personal take over completely. And once I understood that she was supposed to be incompetent and she just wasn't this annoying character that I found inappropriate, but that was supposed to be inappropriate in the book, I started to enjoy this and appreciate this and even giggle a few times. Having said that, I still think the writing was off tone. There were uses of slang and just general dialogue that did not seem fitting at all. I think there was especially a lot of British slang where I felt like, would this person talk like that if they have been outside of Britain for so long and if they're not talking to like someone who's at their same level? I really questioned that. Overall, this book didn't quite land for me and I gave it a 3.5 star. This would have been a long list book for me personally. I don't really see how it fits very well on the shortlist compared to what I've read from the long list, which is almost everything. This one doesn't really fit there for me. All Fours by Miranda July is one weird book without it being weird fiction. We meet our main character. She's in her mid-40s. She seems to have it all: career, husband, child, friends, fame, money. Like literally she is living on a soft pillow, I would want to say. And then she feels this lack of excitement in her life, and through actually not a suggestion of her own but her husband's suggestion, when she decides to visit New York as a solo trip, they kind of talk, her husband and their friends talk about how cool it will be to do a cross-country road trip, and they romanticize it, and she's like, I'm going to do that to New York and back. But then 30 minutes on her drive, she decides to stay at a motel she finds there, and she stays at that motel throughout the entire time that she tells other people that she is driving across the country. I mostly like this book. I really appreciated how it explored this sense of boredom and emptiness through sex without it being overly sexual. It sounds very complicated, but it was very much about everything that the main character would connect to the feelings she would have that also connect to sex. It's not smut, it's very literary exploration of what feelings around sex mean or could possibly mean. And what I like most about this book is how that was all connected to the main character's age and to the idea of premenopause and menopause itself, and how she connects other women to that feeling. I do think that was a small part of the book where it was really clear that that is what the book is about. I think I would have found this book definitely more interesting if that was more heavy-handed, which I don't think I say often. Menopause had been such a big, clear theme throughout the entire novel and not just throughout certain parts. It would have captured my attention more. But I guess that would take away space from the feeling I had earlier in the novel, where the book feels like the way that men used to write literary fiction post-sexual revolution, where it's very much about their feelings and what they are experiencing, with complete blind spots to the feelings or just the individuality or the personality of another person, which is of course why I'm critical of those books. But it kind of feels like this is a response. It's definitely very midlife heavy, but it's from a female perspective. I feel like men who say that women just experience sex differently, have them read this book and see how genderless sex can be, which I did also find an interesting theme in this book, that so many aspects of life are genderless. It's also present in a way that our main character talks about her child, whom she's very protective of in a way that she tells us about this child. We get snippets of a child. It's kind of when you see YouTubers blur their child's faces. I feel like that is kind of how this main character was protecting their child, because there's definitely something going on with their child that we don't know about. You can guess some bits here and there. All that matters is what you are being told, and those things matter a lot for the main character. So I found this book very interesting, but I have one ick with it, which can be detrimental, let's be honest. I found it so first world problems, and it became whiny at points because of that. Everything has a place and time, of course, and everything is allowed to exist and be. I did sometimes find it very annoying that this character has so much privilege and has so much comfort in her life. So many things are so easy that she started to obsess and complain about things that just did not matter. They matter to her, but if you have real problems, they cannot possibly matter. The main character has a best friend with whom she shares everything. I was envisioning being that best friend and being so done with my friend being whining and complaining and going on and on and on about a certain person or topic. I could not be as patient as the best friend in this book. I would have been out the door long ago. Having said that, patience is not one of my virtues. I do try to be kind and listen and be patient. I try, but this character had me eye rolling hard a few times. I always try to be kind and understanding, but sometimes you just want to scream, get over it. Just get over it. When the main character got very obsessive over certain things because they did not matter. Maybe that's also a part of it, because they later explain that a lot of it is connected to menopause, and I feel like as a woman now starting my 30s, that is something I want to know so much more about, because I feel like not a lot is known and not a lot of women prepare until they're actually there. I really appreciated that, and I appreciated that there was space for a topic like that on the Women's Prize, so I get why this made it to the shortlist. I also would not be super surprised if this won. I also wouldn't be mad at it, but it did have a lot of mixed reviews with reviewers, which I also understand. I gave this a 4-star. One of my favorite fiction so far, I don't know if it's my favorite, but definitely one of my favorites, I gave it 5 stars, is The Safekeep by J.L. van der Wouden. This is set in the Netherlands, in Zwolle, in the 1960s, in 1960 and 1961 to be exact. And we follow Isabel, who is a 30-year-old woman who lives in quite a beautiful family home. She has 2 brothers, one older, one younger, and her older brother one day during one of their family dinners brings a girlfriend home. This is nothing strange, he always brings plenty girlfriends. They're kind of used to this from him. But then a few days later he calls Isabel and says, Eva, my girlfriend, has nowhere to stay where she can be safe, so I'm going to send her your way and she's going to stay in the family home while I am out of town. Isabel is very protective of her home. She has a lot of trauma connecting to the home, connecting to the Second World War, towards loss and grief, and she is kind of neurotic about the possessions of the home, which is one of the major themes in this book and is very much explored later in the book, all for you to figure out. That is why she does not want another person living in that house with her. Eva is a bit strange. She has a very different, much more open, extroverted personality than Isabel does. Throughout the novel, their relationship keeps on changing, I would say. This book kind of has everything. It is a very readable, fast read, literary fiction. I read it within 2 days, and when I was doing something else, I was like, I want to get back to this book. And would also recommend the audiobook. Very well done. This book is filled with tension and mystery, and while you don't get like the typical mystery where you're introduced to something mysterious and then you have to find it out, it keeps being introduced in the book and kind of makes the reader guess. I think I guessed what was going on quite late in the book, maybe 2 or 3 chapters before there were actually very clear hints. And I think if you know some things about Dutch history, you will get it sooner than if you don't. Which, by the way, is not a pretty part of Dutch history. That is also something I appreciated. I feel like in Dutch culture, because the Netherlands was occupied by the Nazis, it can be very glorified in they were bad, we were good. But this book is very much about how the culture after the war developed and how people responded to the things that had happened during the war and the things that people were doing. Good to have a critical voice about that, and I think it's very necessary as well. Another major theme that I didn't really expect in this book is about love, about sex, about sexuality. So how that connects to finding peace after trauma, after war. And in that sense, this book is actually very beautiful, which I wasn't thinking going in, because I don't necessarily think that typical Dutch literary fiction is very beautiful. There's not a lot of space for beauty. While this author is Dutch, she wrote it in English. And maybe that was a conscious choice because it doesn't really feel like Dutch literature, which was a plus for me in this period of time. I really love this. I also don't know what to say about it really, because I've watched a lot of people talk about this and I feel like a lot of people consciously stay vague, because this is really one of those books where you need to let things surprise you. Yeah, this is my winner. Well, I'm saying that right now. I still have to read Good Girl by Adia Aber, but thematically I know I won't necessarily enjoy that, so the writing would have to blow me away to knock this off my #1 of the shortlist. So this was the book from the non-fiction shortlist that I actually didn't want to read because I wanted to prevent not reading the winner. I read it anyway, and that is Agent So. I was right, this was not interesting to me personally. Nevertheless, I do see the book as a valuable piece of non-fiction, so let's talk about it. We follow Elizabeth Jawaka. She was a Polish soldier and resistance fighter, although not officially a soldier, because as we come to know later in the novel, the military is very misogynistic. Who knew? The book follows her life with a big focus on the military and on her feminism, mostly about women in the military and about her as a teacher. I'm saying that's where the focus is on, but I felt like her entire life was in service of those things. So it might just be more a general biography, because she is present in everything that happened. She devoted decades and decades to these topics and to these parts of her life. We start off in the 1930s, late 1930s, I believe, as she is part of the Polish resistance to fight the Nazi regime and to fight the Nazi occupation in Poland, which was one of the most fierce, if not the most fierce ones in Europe. Like, the occupation was the most intense. Traveled a lot, she smuggled ware. She also traveled to Britain, where there was a group of Polish resistance fighters who operated from Britain. There were a few things in this book that I want to talk about. First of all, the main character is an extreme nationalist, a Polish nationalist, which means something different, I think now, means something different now than it meant back then, because Poland's independence was always under fire, whether from the Nazis or the Soviets. It was something that was in constant need of fighting for. And before that as well, but I kind of forgot the details about that, so I'm not gonna embarrass myself by trying to remember. It meant something different back then. It still made me a bit uncomfortable because it did create blind spots and a harshness and a lack of maybe a sense of equality. I'm not sure that's really what I got from this book, but this book definitely glorified military service, which made me incredibly uncomfortable. Well, again, it's in a different time period. It had a different meaning than it would now in Europe. Felt like so many perspectives were not viewed in this book. Elisabetta did a lot of very important things. I also think she made a lot of victims, not with any vicious means, for her cause. Of course, a lot of people were in danger and a lot of people died under her instruction. And I felt like that was a little bit under discussed, especially the importance of those people's lives. I think I missed a certain multiple POV idea of this book. I think that's mostly a personal response of what I wanted on this topic than on the fact that this book wasn't well written, because this was Zoe's story and no one else's. I really understand why the author wrote this book the way she did, but for me it meant that I missed some things and there were a lot of repetitions in Zoe's life, which of course makes sense. A life can be very repetitive, but to read all of that in quite a long book I felt was unnecessary for me as a reader. So while I can see that this is a valuable book for someone who is diving maybe into this topic, someone who does research into this topic or is very, very interested in reading stories of individuals, I am more of a thematical reader. So for me, this wasn't as valuable as it could have been. And that's maybe just a kind way of saying that I was a little bit bored reading this. Having said that, this is the kind of book that provides historical perspective that we need. Is that extra reminder that history is written by men and that they purposely leave out things that very much did happen. Resistance fighters, soldiers during the Second World War, women were very present in that world, and it weren't just the men that fought that war, which is not something, of course, a lot of people give a lot of attention to. If like me you're more of a thematic reader, I would recommend this book if you're interested in that topic, which is The Unwomanly Face of War. This is a very rich collection of interviews with a lot of different women from the Soviet Union who fought in the Second World War. A lot of different women, a lot of different perspectives, and something I would highly recommend if you want to read about this topic. So while Agent Zoe may have not paid off as a book that I was not initially interested in, but that I did end up reading, this book definitely did, because this was heart-wrenching, which is a funny use of words, but that's just the word I have for it. This is called The Story of a Heart, and it follows two families and their two children who are both in the hospital. One of them is terminally ill and the other one has fatal injuries. We follow the two children and their families and a lot of healthcare professionals that were involved in their care. The author is a doctor herself, so she's also a healthcare professional. In the afterword it said that she interviewed all of these healthcare professionals about their experience, including one doctor who was so traumatized by the care for the child with fatal injuries that they have PTSD now, which I found really hard and difficult to listen to. I listened to it on audiobook. This book has this big emotional component. What I liked about this book is that the author really could have used the pathos of this narrative, of this story, of this thing that's happened, and enlarge the emotional experience of the reader, but she very consciously did not do that by already telling in the introduction how this story ends. So we are with the families as things develop, and we do have these different timelines that kind of come together at the end. This is a story that actually happened. It was in the newspapers as well to ask for attention for organ donations. The child who is terminally ill gets the heart, the organ of the child that had the fatal injuries and that was not going to make it any shape or form. So we have that part, and then we have different storylines of the healthcare professionals. We also get to know them as a person, which I found so just valuable because it gave so many different human experiences in one book. And then one of the reasons why this book, drumroll please, is a 5-star for me was the other part of the book. Because yes, this is a beautiful emotional story. If the book had just been that, this would have been a solid 4-star for me. But the author wanted to do more because this book had an educational component in a historical sense. Intertwined in the story of these two children is the history of organ donation and everything that has led up to the possibility of the operation that is central in this book. Of course, in the history of organ donation, generally in any medical history, there are so many dark and unethical parts to it, and this author was very critical about that and very honest, very unglorifying. And with that also comes a lot of medical details that are interesting, but that I as a person do not quite have the stomach for. So I had to pause this book a few times and deal with my, I would say, almost nauseating experience towards these medical details, because I am such an incredible visual person. If something is described to me, I see it happening, and that is not a pleasant experience when it comes to gruesome medical details. It's not purposely gruesome, it's just the truth, and I think if you're a healthcare or medical professional and you're used to these things, maybe as far as you can get used to anything like that, I think it's much easier to read about them and to separate your own bodily existence from those details and from that part of education. I am very unused and untrained in that part. While the emotional part was difficult to read and I teared up a few times, I think I'm used to those kind of details in the books that I read, and I'm used to those kind of feelings being invoked, so I know how to deal with those. I am not used to getting creeped out by medical details when I know all of it is real. Yes, and that I found, like when it's horror, you know it's all fake. But this is a non-fiction, difficult and hard, and I would not necessarily recommend this book to people who do not have a strong stomach in that sense. But otherwise I would say, while the topics are incredibly interesting, while the people that we follow are incredibly interesting, the writing is immaculate in this book. As was the narration, which is also done by the author herself. I just on a moment for the fact that this woman is a doctor. She is an amazing writer. I thought the writing was flawless in this book. And she is an incredible narrator. Usually when authors narrate their own books, when I see it like on Libro FM, I'm like, oh no, let's listen to the sample first, because while I think it's very admirable to have a go, I do think that narrating audiobooks is a skill in itself, and sometimes it is better to let a professional handle it. But Rachel Clark is a woman of multiple talents, and I'm very impressed with this book. Absolute 5-star. I think it's harder to pinpoint a winner for the non-fiction, because I think you have a lot of genres also within the non-fiction, and they are very different and very hard to compare. So when I put this together with something like Nina Cherry's book, I find them very difficult to compare because they have such a different goal to them. This is my winner, and I have been kind of ranking them, and I will upload a short where I rank the books very soon, because I have to read about 70 to 80 pages of this one before I upload this video today. So I'll see you in a second with a review for Good Girl. I did it! With over 24 hours to go, I have finished both the shortlists. My last book to finish was Good Girl by Aria Aber. Follow our main character, who is 18 years old. She lives in Berlin. In the beginning of the novel, she is with her parents, who are from Afghanistan. Growing up, she had a hard time with the strict rules inside the house and the racism and misunderstanding outside of it. In a sort of rebellion, but also bordering mental illness, she goes out, she uses a lot of drugs, she has a lot of questionable friends, and at some point she meets a man, an American man, who is in his late 30s. He's a writer, and they start a relationship. This book has a lot of art, music, nightlife, drugs, toxic relationships that I would associate with this main character and with the period in her life where those elements are actually really dangerous towards your decision making and towards how vulnerable you are. I don't usually like to read about those themes. That is because the main characters are often at an age where I feel like it is just annoying and inappropriate to behave that way. But because this main character is 18, I actually really feel the danger of her situation, because she is so vulnerable to abuse, and she is so vulnerable in general, standing up for herself, making decisions, and everything feels so dangerous because she is so young. And that is kind of the strength of this book, because that vulnerability is actually real, and it doesn't come from a certain childishness. If she had been in her late 20s or in her 30s, for example, if this book would have been written from the perspective of her lover, this book would have been so annoying. But I felt really the pain and the danger because of her age. I gave a fresh perspective towards her behavior and towards drug use in a way of coping with mental health issues while being so vulnerable. Another important theme of this book is her never being at home anywhere. She's neither at home with her parents, who have never felt safe and part of the country that they have moved to, but she also doesn't feel at home in the country where she was born, because she has this different heritage, and there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of racism towards Muslims as well in this period of time, which is current day. This book pleasantly surprised me. I really enjoyed reading it. It will not be a book that really stays with me. I'm giving it 4 stars. I think it's a solid read, but not necessarily mind-blowing. I have made a little ranking of the shortlist, which I will upload tonight as a little short. So if you're watching this like 1 or 2 hours later, so when I'm uploading this, then you can go to my channel page, and on the tabs it says like videos and shorts, and I will share my ranking. Let me know if you've read any of the Women's Prize books. Which one is your favorite for either the fiction or the non-fiction prize? I'm really curious to know. I have shared my winners with you, which I'm actually convinced will be the actual winners. We have the Safekeep and A Story of a Heart, which I am quite convinced will actually win. I also wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. I don't have any strong predictions like I did the previous years. I feel like a lot of books are kind of on the same level, and my absolute favorites were all on the long list and didn't make it to the short list. Yeah, I will sit down once the winner is announced, give a live reaction and talk a little bit about my overall thoughts of the prize. So that video you can expect in 1 or 2 days, and I will see you then. Doei!